What are you thinking about? Those 9 bodies you left down there?
Yes. But I didn't kill them.
Still sticking to your story about the mysterious creature. Do you expect a court-martial to believe it?
That's all I can tell them. Those people were killed by something. Not me.
By the late 1950s, space wasn't a dream anymore. It was a threat. Rockets were launching, satellites were falling, and Hollywood was asking a brand new question. What if we actually brought something back? In 1958, one tiny black and white film answered that question with a chilling story that would echo through cinema for decades. It, the terror from beyond space, didn't have money, color, or stars, but it had atmosphere, claustrophobia, and one of the most terrifying monsters ever stuffed inside a rubber suit. It crawled into theaters quietly. But its idea would go on to inspire Alien, The Thing, and half a century of deep space nightmares. These are 16 weird facts about the movie that taught the world there's something worse than dying in space, bringing it home. Number 1. It directly inspired Alien, 1979. Before the chestburster, before the facehugger, there was It, a small black and white monster film that would quietly rewrite the DNA of sci-fi horror. Screenwriter Dan O'Bannon, the man behind Alien, later admitted he'd borrowed the entire concept. A deadly extraterrestrial trapped with a crew aboard a confined spaceship, hunting them one by one. The DNA of that 1958 B-movie ran through every corridor of the Nostromo. While Ridley Scott turned it into a sleek nightmare drenched in shadows and steam, the bones were already here. Low-budget paranoia, flickering lights, and the growing dread that something unseen was breathing in the vents. It proved that fear didn't need space battles or laser guns. It just needed a monster you couldn't escape. And that's The Legacy, a forgotten film that cost peanuts, yet became the uncredited ancestor of one of the greatest horror franchises ever made. Number 2. The man inside the monster suit nearly suffocated. Ray Crash Corrigan, a former cowboy actor turned creature performer, was the poor soul trapped inside the suffocating rubber nightmare that played It. The suit was sealed tight with glue, heavy latex, and layers of padding, with barely any holes for air. Under the blinding heat of studio lights, temperatures inside the costume reached over 120 degrees. Corrigan often staggered off set between takes, drenched in sweat and gasping for air. There were no cooling tubes, no ventilation fans, just raw endurance. The crew sometimes had to peel the mask off his face mid-scene so he wouldn't pass out. To make matters worse, the costume's claws and jaw constantly tore or jammed, meaning every fix required him to stand perfectly still while suffocating inside. By the end of filming, Corrigan swore it would be his last monster gig, and it was. It, the terror from beyond space, was the film that literally took his breath away. Number 3. The entire film was shot in less than 2 weeks. Hollywood productions today can spend months just setting up a single scene. But in 1958, director Edward L. Kahn had less than 2 weeks and a monster movie to deliver. Armed with recycled sets, a tiny crew, and a script that couldn't afford a single wasted line, he shot the entire film in just 12 grueling days. Every corridor, every shadow, and every scream had to be captured on the first or second take. Kahn was a master of efficiency. He reused lighting setups, shot multiple angles at once, and had actors perform full dialogue scenes in single uninterrupted takes. The result is a movie that moves fast, tight, and desperate. Exactly like the story it's telling. That insane production schedule gave the film its raw, claustrophobic energy. There was no time to fake fear. Everyone on set really was running out of time, space, and air. Number 4, the creature's skull design was based on a gorilla. Special effects artist Paul Blaisdell didn't have a Hollywood workshop or a team of assistants, just clay, paint, and imagination. To design It, he started with something hauntingly familiar, a gorilla skull. He studied its bone structure, exaggerated the brow, and added reptilian textures to create a face that felt both human and alien, animal and intelligent. The result was a monster that looked like evolution had taken a wrong turn somewhere far from Earth. That skull gave the creature an uncanny realism. It wasn't the tentacled blob audiences expected. It had depth, history, a kind of primal sadness behind the eyes. It looked like something that might have evolved under different stars, on a planet where survival meant becoming both predator and survivor. And that subtle touch, part ape, part nightmare, made It stand out from the rubbery creatures of its era. It wasn't just a costume. It was a warning from our own reflection.
Calder? Still here.
The plate on this torch says good for 3 hours continuous use. Says to return it for your money back if unsatisfied.
Number 5. The title was a last-minute marketing decision. The script originally went by the simple name It. Short, punchy, but forgettable. Studio executives thought it needed something bigger. something that sounded cosmic enough to fill drive-ins across America. So, just weeks before release, they tacked on a longer, louder title, It, the Terror from Beyond Space. It didn't mean much, but it sounded terrifying, and that's all that mattered. The phrase beyond space didn't describe any real location. It was pure 1950s hype. The posters splashed it in bold red letters over screaming astronauts and claw marks, promising an otherworldly horror audiences hadn't seen before. It worked. Teenagers lined up for miles at late-night screenings, eager to see what kind of terror could travel from beyond the stars. Sometimes a good scare starts with the words on the marquee. That cheap last-minute title turned a B-movie into a cult legend that still sounds cool 65 years later. Number 6. The spaceship set reused submarine equipment. With no budget to build a futuristic starship from scratch, the production team scavenged whatever they could find and ended up raiding the Navy. The cramped metallic corridors, control panels, and blinking gauges seen in the film were actually leftover submarine parts and props borrowed from military training reels. The crew even reused periscope mounts and oxygen dials, repainting them silver to look space-age. That clever recycling gave the ship an unexpected realism. The tight quarters, hissing pipes, and metallic echo didn't feel like fantasy. They felt industrial, lived in, almost claustrophobic. It was less Buck Rogers and more Battleship in Orbit. The irony? That gritty, recycled look accidentally predicted the future of sci-fi design. And 20 years later, Alien would use the same philosophy, turning sleek rocket ships into grimy, functional machines that felt terrifyingly real.
Oh, he isn't here. Come on.
Number 7. It's often called the first outer space horror movie. Before It, the Terror from Beyond Space, aliens always came to us. They invaded our cities, crashed in our deserts, or crawled out of radioactive swamps. But this time, the terror was brought home by humans, astronauts who unknowingly carried death aboard their own ship. That single idea flipped the entire genre upside down. The fear wasn't about invasion anymore. It was about containment. A small crew, a confined metal coffin, and a creature that could be anywhere. The movie trapped horror in the one place you couldn't run from: space itself. It made the void personal, claustrophobic, and inescapable. That bold twist didn't just make audiences scream, it changed the rules forever. Every monster on a ship story that came after owes its oxygen to this tiny black and white film from 1958. Before we go on, if you're loving these deep dives into 1950s monster mayhem, hit that subscribe button. It keeps the rockets fueled and the classics alive. And don't go anywhere. The next set of facts will take you inside the chaos of the It set, from broken noses to lost props, and the moment this cheap space thriller accidentally shaped modern horror forever. Alright, back to the terror from beyond space. Number 8. The monster actor secretly owned the costume company. Ray Crash Corrigan wasn't just sweating inside the monster suit, he was profiting from it. At the time, Corrigan owned a small Hollywood rental company that specialized in gorilla and creature costumes. When It went into production, the studio needed a monster on the cheap, so Corrigan offered his own services and his own wardrobe for a package deal. That meant the star of the movie was literally renting the costume to himself. The producers thought they were saving money, but Corrigan cleverly turned his misery into a business opportunity, earning double as performer and supplier. It's a perfect example of 1950s B-movie hustle, where actors, directors, and technicians wore as many hats as necessary just to get a movie made. In Corrigan's case, one of those hats happened to be a suffocating alien head. Number 9. Mars was really Los Angeles. The Martian landscape that opens the film, a barren, windswept wasteland, wasn't shot on another planet or even in a desert. It was filmed in Bronson Canyon, a rocky area tucked inside Los Angeles Griffith Park. If it looks familiar, that's because it's Hollywood's favorite fake alien world. From Star Trek to RoboCop to countless serials, those same caves have played everything from alien planets to atomic wastelands. The crew dragged in a few props, dumped some sand, and blasted the rocks with smoke to make it feel otherworldly. In black and white, it worked perfectly. The harsh sunlight and jagged shadows gave it a menacing, almost lunar tone. To this day, you can walk through those same tunnels and stand exactly where Mars once was. Proof that sometimes the most alien landscapes are just a few miles from downtown LA. Number 10. The film predicted modern astronaut gear. Long before NASA launched its first manned missions, It, the Terror from Beyond Space, was already imagining what real space travel might look like. The film's bulky suits, chest packs, and oxygen masks weren't just random props. They were modeled after experimental Air Force prototypes that the crew managed to borrow for authenticity. That's why the astronauts don't look like comic book heroes in shiny outfits. They look like test pilots trapped in claustrophobic functional machinery. Every buckle, hose, and valve was designed to look heavy, pressurized, and dangerously real. Watching it now feels eerie because those designs weren't far off. 2 decades later, when the Apollo astronauts walked on the moon, their suits looked strikingly similar to the ones imagined in this tiny 1958 thriller. Number 11. The script originally featured 2 monsters. In the earliest drafts, it wasn't supposed to be a lone creature. The story began with 2 Martian predators sneaking aboard the rescue ship, a breeding pair that would multiply as the crew tried to return to Earth. It was meant to turn the spaceship into a floating nightmare of infestation and paranoia. But when the studio saw the budget, the second creature was the first thing to go. One monster was cheaper, easier to film, and simpler to hide in the shadows. Ironically, that limitation made the movie scarier. Instead of chaos, audiences got tension, the haunting thought that even one alien could wipe out a ship full of trained astronauts. Sometimes, less really is more. What started as a financial cut became a storytelling masterstroke that influenced every single one creature, one ship horror film that followed. Number 12. Critics ignored it until decades later. When It, the Terror from Beyond Space hit theaters in 1958, reviewers barely noticed. Most wrote it off as another rubber suit monster flick, lumping it in with the countless atomic bug and alien invasion films clogging drive-ins that year. The film made a modest profit, played for a few weeks, and then vanished into late-night TV reruns. But time has a funny way of correcting things. As sci-fi matured, film historians began tracing the roots of space horror. And there it was, this tiny, forgotten movie that did it all first. The isolation, the claustrophobia, the distrust between crew members, everything Alien later perfected began here. Today, it's recognized as a cult cornerstone of the genre, often described as the missing link between pulp monsters and psychological horror. It may have been ignored in 1958, but in hindsight, it was light years ahead of its time. Number 13. The creature was meant to be intelligent. Early drafts of the script described it not as a mindless beast, but as a calculated predator, capable of strategy, problem-solving, and even curiosity. In those pages, the creature learned from the crew's behavior, cutting off air supplies, stalking them through the ventilation shafts, and waiting for its prey instead of charging in. Budget and time stripped away most of that nuance. What remained on screen was a silent, lumbering figure. But the performance still hinted at something thinking behind those empty eyes. The way it studies its victims, the pauses before it attacks, even the slow turns of its head suggest intelligence just barely hidden under instinct. That quiet menace made the creature far scarier. A monster that kills is terrifying, but a monster that plans? That's pure nightmare fuel. Number 14. One of the actors broke his nose during filming. Tension wasn't just happening in the script, it was happening on set too. During one of the cramped corridor fight scenes, actor Kim Spaulding, who played Colonel Carruthers, took a sharp elbow to the face from a co-star mid-struggle. The hit broke his nose on the spot. But with no money for reshoots and barely any time left on the schedule, Spaulding stuffed tissue in his nostrils, wiped the blood, and kept filming. You can actually spot moments in the finished film where his nose looks slightly swollen or he's breathing through his mouth. Small tells of a real injury hidden under performance. It only added to the movie's gritty realism, as if the stress of the story had started to spill out into reality. It was the kind of raw, rough, and ready filmmaking that defined the 1950s B-movie scene. Painful, chaotic, and absolutely unstoppable. Number 15. A remake was almost made in the 1990s. In the mid-1990s, cult director Larry Cohen, the mind behind The Stuff and It's Alive, decided to resurrect it, The Terror from Beyond Space, for a new generation. His version would have leaned hard into body horror and psychological tension, mixing 1950s pulp with the slick paranoia of aliens. The script modernized the setting, gave the crew darker motives, and turned the creature into a bioengineered survivor rather than a natural monster. Studios showed interest, but timing killed it. Fox was already developing Alien Resurrection, and executives worried audiences would see Cohen's project as a cheap knockoff of the franchise it originally inspired. Within months, the remake quietly vanished into studio archives. It's a fitting irony. The movie that inspired Alien was stopped by Alien's own success. The circle of sci-fi life, sealed by Hollywood caution. Number 16. It marked the end of the 1950s monster era. By the time It, The Terror from Beyond Space hit theaters in 1958, the golden age of black and white creature features was dying out. Audiences were turning toward glossy, colorful visions of the future, rockets, ray guns, and optimistic space heroes, while the moody shadows and rubber monsters of the early decade faded into nostalgia. It arrived right at that crossroads, bridging the pulpy horror of the past with the grounded science fiction realism that would dominate the next generation. It didn't roar at the box office, but its DNA carried forward. The claustrophobic spaceship, the distrustful crew, the unseen menace lurking in the dark, those ideas survived, mutating into Alien, Event Horizon, The Thing, and countless others. What began as a quick B picture ended as a blueprint for an entire subgenre. So, while the 1950s monster cycle was gasping its last breath, it was already breathing new life into sci-fi horror. The final scream of one era and the first heartbeat of the next. It, the terror from beyond space, may have been shot fast, cheap, and buried under decades of bigger, louder movies, but it never truly disappeared. It's the spark that ignited the idea of being hunted in the void, the film that whispered a new kind of fear, not invasion, but isolation. It traded atomic spectacle for psychological dread, trapping terror in narrow corridors and recycled metal walls. And in doing so, it quietly changed the language of science fiction forever. So, which fact about it, the terror from beyond space, shocked you the most? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more forgotten monsters, lost studios, and space horrors that paved the way for modern sci-fi, hit that subscribe button, because sometimes the scariest stories start with something small.